So what is that with you? What is that yoga for you?
What is yoga for me? Is that what you
Yeah,
asked?
like in yeah, exactly. Because if we look into online, there are, I mean, yoga is the Sanskrit term which is means by union, right? So there is a way, vinyasa flow, and there are different types of hatha yogas are there. So how do you see the yoga? What you see? How do you feel about it? And what was the story with you?
Well, I mean, I'd say there's a lot of different aspects to the question that you just asked. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
to the latter part, like what does it mean to me or how do I feel about it? I came to yoga in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a very bad way. My mother had died when I was 16 years old, and I was in a really bad way. And I went to a yoga class while I was in college and had an experience there, and it just became one of the things. I had a friend at one point in my life where I was really at my lowest. And they said, "Can you
Mm-hmm.
think of anything that you've done, any experiences that you've had that felt like joyful, that made you feel good about yourself and life at all?" And
Mm-hmm.
I could only really identify two things. One was playing my electric bass guitar because I was a musician at the time, and the other
Mm-hmm.
was having gone to this yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in the early 90s in New York City. And that was
Mm-hmm.
when people were first really kind of bringing yoga back from India and setting up shop and opening up these yoga centers in Manhattan. And they
Mm-hmm.
were hybriding. It was before they even had vinyasa flow. They didn't call it vinyasa flow. There was the schools. There was BKS Iyengar. There was Shivananda. There was
Mm-hmm.
Patabi Joyce and the Ashtanga Vinyasa, and everybody was going and studying with these teachers. And then they were mixing things. They were hybriding things, and that's what became
Mm-hmm.
vinyasa flow. So for me, at some point, I was very wrapped up in that, what you're just talking about, the kind of move
Mm-hmm.
towards asana performance and kind of like a marketing of yoga in the West. But at some point, I had injuries and
Mm-hmm.
I became very disenchanted with the yoga that I was doing. And I found my way to the teachings of TKV Desikachar. And that was really
Mm-hmm.
what turned it around for me. And it became
Mm-hmm.
much more about personal practice and my own sense of direction and purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've continued to study for 3 decades now, just learning about all the different philosophical viewpoints within yoga. My
Mm-hmm.
podcast for the last 10 years, I've just been having people on who come from different traditions and different viewpoints and to
Mm-hmm.
hear what those are. And for myself, it's really been the primary vehicle for me to not only figure out my sense of self, but I would
Mm-hmm.
also say more recently, my relationship to God and to the divine.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would say
Like
to it today.
yeah, the yoga, the Sanskrit term, the yoga means is the union. So there is a question, like union with what? So if we look into the text, which is like, from the Western authors or Indian authors, especially Aleister Crowley, that people in the West call him as a Satanist, but his books talks about yoga and the philosophies of Upanishads. And when we get the thing of union, we get a sort of activation in our subconscious level, where we will be able to connect with the people, nature, and ability to control the nature, sort of stuffs. So when we look into all these things, how do you feel about that? You got united?
Well, first of all, I don't know that Aleister Crowley is a very good source for
Mm-hmm.
yoga interpretation. I think he's a very questionable figure, and I have read quite a bit about him. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if he's the person that I'm going to look for in terms of
Hmm.
interpreting yoga and its scriptures. I know that I've had countless people on. I've got 5 translations of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras on my shelf,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
depending
mhm,
on which translation I want to read, I can get a very different idea about what yoga is or what yoga means. In terms of
mhm,
yoga being a union, I would say that I've heard it talked about in a lot of different ways, that
mhm,
the idea that yoga means union, yoga could be a state of union, that we are like the
mhm,
natural state that we're born into, as you were saying, in
mhm,
touch with nature and your environment in relationship to those things. And then there's things
mhm,
that get in the way of that, right? And
mhm,
then practice would be about removing some of those glaciers and things that have gotten in the way so that you could
mhm,
experience yourself in that more um, direct way.
mhm,
In terms of how I feel about yoga being about union, I think you're right. Yoga can be about union, but what you're uniting to can be a lot of different things.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
I think
Yeah,
that,
this is exactly the question. We are getting united to what, and for what,
yeah,
and
yeah,
after getting united, what? So there are a lot of questions like that actually existing, but most of the people and even the ancient text, they don't know what happens after getting united. This is one thing, because rishis didn't explain this state after, like, in Upanishad, this particular state is called as fourth or the todiyam. So we really don't know what happens after that, like, so because it is quite interesting how do the western world approach the yoga. And because most of the time, if we look into the what is happening in many yoga schools, there are a lot of physical practices is being shown, or there might be some mantras is been associated with that. And some of them are really into this, like, they made a difference. They came, they got the status of the guru even from the Indian audience also. There is things like that has been happened, like, so also when, like, for example, if a westerner look into India, there are 10 things you can actually point out. This is a little crazy. Like, there is some ritualistic behavior. And the same way, if we look into the west, we can see there is 10 crazy stuff. So in that case, like, how do you feel about this, like?
well, there's 2 things that I feel like you're asking about. One would be about gurus, and I know when I
Mhm,
got to yoga, that was like where you looked to for wisdom. So I went to
mhm,
India in 1998 to look for a guru. I didn't
mhm,
exactly find one, but I
mhm,
think a lot of us also
mhm,
watched some sort of fall from grace from some of these
mhm,
gurus, like all kinds of things. People put them on certain pedestals or
mhm,
attributed certain things to them, and then those things
mhm,
didn't necessarily show to be true. And so a
mhm,
lot of people had to kind of reconcile that.
mhm,
Um, I myself, had teachers who taught more of like an inner guru rather than like an outer guru or a guru principle that was more about a teacher rather than like somebody you give over all your agency to.
mhm,
Um, I do think that the other part of your question, when you talk about the things that happen, like certain rituals and certain things that challenge Western sensibilities,
mhm,
I think
mhm,
you're right
mhm,
about that. I do think that
mhm,
yoga is rooted in a mystical tradition, and it's rooted in
mhm,
a culture that has as a given that there is a mystical realm, that there's beyond the material. And I
mhm,
think in the
mhm,
West, a lot of times the viewpoint is limited to the material and they
mhm,
don't acknowledge that there's something beyond that. But I think for me,
mhm,
that's one of the reasons why I've always become passionate about yoga practice, is because it offered that wider range of possibility. It acknowledged that
mhm,
there's an Atman, and that there's a
mhm,
soul, and that there's something beyond just this physical body. Uh,
mhm,
so for me, I think that resonates more as true, that clearly there's more to this life that we're having than just the physical.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So this is quite interesting. You've been in India, the first time when you came to India. I mean, still there are. I have a lot of Western friends. They point out this thing seems like very crazy. Oh, this thing is super crazy. If this guy was in West, he could be jailed. So something like that. When you were in India, what is the thing which you felt really crazy?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't feel that way about it. I went to
Mm-hmm,
India and I was prepared to like never go back to America. I was in a really
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
a crossroads in my spiritual journey, and I
mm-hmm,
think that I went to India to try to figure out what I was supposed to do. And I
mm-hmm.
remember when I first got there, for like the first several days, I really freaked out. Like like you say, it's just such a different culture, and I hadn't really traveled outside of the United States before, so it was a real
Mhm,
shock. And I
mhm,
remember like going to the train station to try to catch a train, and the train was very late,
mhm,
and you couldn't get the ticket for the first class section at the train station. You had to go to the travel agency. There was all these ways that things happened there, even just like practical things. And
mhm,
eventually I remember something happened in me where I gave up. I gave up on
mhm,
like trying to control or trying to have life go
mhm,
in a certain
mhm,
way like it had been, and I just gave over to it. I was like, you have to be in India the way that India is, not the way that you want it to be.
mhm,
And I feel
mhm,
like
mhm,
when I let go and I gave over to it, I kind of
mhm,
released into a flow of the way life was there. And
mhm,
I learned about yoga. I learned about yoga more just from being in India and
mhm,
giving over in that way than I did after years of training with very renowned teachers in New York.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I do think, in terms of things that I saw, I remember I was at Hardwar, and they were
mhm,
having, what's it called, the Amrati festival, where all these people
mhm,
had come to the river and they were all doing
Arati,
pujas,
Arati,
and their
Ganga
faces were
Arati.
painted. And it was
Mhm,
me and my friend, and we were the only Westerners, and we were like really
mhm,
nervous. We were really afraid.
mhm,
And
mhm,
then some wonderful man came up to me and just
mhm,
kind of put his arm around me and took me in and helped me.
mhm,
And we made like a boat of
mhm,
flowers, like out of a leaf with flowers and a candle in it. And we lit
mhm,
the candle and we put it on the river. And it
mhm,
was a very special moment for me, that it was all like you say, there was a lot of like trance
mhm,
rituals going on, and people in different states. And I think
mhm,
that if people from the West were to be there, they would have said, oh my God, this is completely crazy. But when I was
mhm,
there experiencing it, it felt beautiful. It felt deeply inspiring and kind of magical. So I didn't experience it as weird, but I think you're right. I think other people in the
mhm,
West would probably think it was.
mhm. And how is your spiritual journey over here? I mean, particularly in the yoga. You came to India, you saw some rituals. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are actually specialized to host the Western people in India. Maybe you may get into a circle where the most of the Western peoples are comfortable. Many peoples are not like to break it out and go explore the India in their own way, things like that. Like, how was the journey? Where did you went, and how did you met? Have you met a guru in India? How was it?
I did not. I met a teacher in Rishikesh who was very helpful to me and pointed
Mm-hmm,
me to the teachings of Abhinavagupta and tantric teachings, because I had
mm-hmm,
learned some other teachings about yoga, and he was very
mm-hmm,
helpful to me in that regards. I will say, though, I did, after I got back from that trip and experienced those things, I did explore trying to tap into those things on my own, and did lots of kind of meditations to see if I could experience the astral and see if I could attain cities. And I think at a
mm-hmm,
certain point, I got like a message. I got a message, a very clear message, which was telling me that I was being reckless. because I
Mhm.
was trying to tap into things, but I didn't know what I was trying to tap into, and I didn't have a guru to guide me in
Mhm.
any of it.
Mhm.
And the message I got, which I do believe now, in retrospect, at the time I didn't think of it this way, but now I believe it was from God. And the
Mhm.
message was, you have to stop doing this. This is not helping you. You need
Mhm.
to have a life. And that's what I did. And I met a partner, and I have a wife, and I have children.
Mhm.
And
You
I
met in
is
India?
no, I met her after I
Mhm.
got back from India.
Mhm.
But the
Mhm.
idea was that there was a difference between trying to reach higher states of consciousness and gain cities or powers, and just
Mhm.
wanting to be in a life and have good relationships and to be well. That these are
Mhm.
different pursuits. So I definitely went to the latter, and that's why I did gravitate toward Desikachar teachings, because those were very helpful to me in terms of
Mhm.
having a regular householder life and integrating
Mhm.
my yoga practice into that. I would say over the last few years, though, there have been many challenges. We've all experienced them with the pandemic and
Mhm.
whatnot. One of my daughters had a real
Mhm.
mental health break coming out of
Mhm.
the pandemic, which was a big challenge for me personally. And in that, I do think my spiritual journey took a little bit of a turn. I used to always fancy myself a very non dual tantric viewpoint, you know?
Mhm.
And I didn't
Mhm.
believe in a creator God. I believed that
Mhm.
essentially I could be God.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I think
that is the philosophy, Advaita, non-duality.
it is, but it's not the only one. And I don't
Mhm.
subscribe to that anymore, because at some
Uh-huh.
point
Uh-huh.
I found myself down on my knees, and
Mhm.
Ishvara Pranidhana took on new meaning when you're
Mhm.
when you realize that you can't do it on your own and you're not God, that there's something bigger than you. Then I think
Mhm.
there's a certain humble
Mhm.
sensibility, a humble place that you where you don't see yourself as the highest. There's something higher than
Mhm.
you. And for me, I don't think that everybody has to take that view, and not everybody does. But I
Mhm.
certainly have come to that place where I feel much more what I would have called religious or like theistic. I really do believe in God, and I've been praying in new
Mhm.
ways. And I think that exists within yoga. I think that's been a long debate, the relationship between
Mhm.
Atman and Brahman. Are they different or are they same? I think that's been debated in yoga philosophy for a long
Mhm.
time. But for
Mhm.
myself, I do believe I went from a more non dual place to a more dual place recently,
Mhm. Mhm.
interestingly
Mhm.
enough.
Yeah, generally people will come from a dualistic place and come to
It's
non-duality
true.
later on.
It's true, but I've gone the other way.
I think yoga is the set of practices that helps you to take to the non-dualistic understanding. Um, I think so. How do you see about that? Like,
I mean, what I've come to believe that it isn't really a choice between non-dual and dual. I used to think that way. I
mm-hmm,
think that they both exist, that
mm-hmm,
we exist within dualities, and
mm-hmm,
then there is an interconnectedness in which all those dualities go away. So I
mm-hmm,
believe that's all. I think both are true. I really think that the distinction comes
mm-hmm,
to whether or not how you feel about Brahman. Like, is there a creator God, or is it just some kind of universal force, you know,
mm-hmm,
like a
mm-hmm,
morphic resonance field, or is there actually a creator being? And I think
mm-hmm,
how one answers that question for themselves really shapes your understanding of yoga. Although I do
mm-hmm,
think there's very universal things like stabilizing your mind so that you can
mm-hmm,
have a clear lens of perception,
mm-hmm,
uh, and so that you could know yourself as an interconnected being that's connected to everything. Like, I think that's very universal, whether you believe there's a creator or not. But I do
mm-hmm,
think at a certain point, whether or not you position yourself as the highest or there's something higher than you really does
mm-hmm.
make a difference.
Mm-hmm. So these are the things when we discuss about the philosophies of the yoga. Yeah, of course, you have gone through the philosophies of the yoga or the Yoga Sutra, why it has been there. So when we speak about the physical practices which you do and teaches, did it help you in spiritual way to reach some level of understanding.
Absolutely. I think that physical
Mm,
practice was a foundation of sorts. Like if your mind, like the texts say, if your mind is all over the place and you don't have a stable mind, you have no way of perceiving clearly. So doing
mm,
breathing and moving practices, I would say specifically the teachings of Desikachar, which are very slow and simple pranayama based practices,
mm,
that those things I believe created conditions in me. They allowed me to have more sustained attention and allowed
mm,
me to recognize patterns in myself,
mm,
behavioral and thought patterns, and that I think gives space for someone to consider deeper questions. You know, if you're all over the place and you can barely be present with someone, you're not
mm,
really in a place to ponder like deep questions about the nature of yourself or whatnot,
mm,
or you're not
mm,
even necessarily in a good place to even just make good choices about what you're going to eat, you know?
mm,
So
mm, mm,
for me, gaining some facility with myself, with my ability to observe myself and to
mm,
utilize practice to stabilize myself and, you know, make myself feel better. I had all kinds of physical pain and difficulty that I've worked through. I've caused myself a lot of physical pain by doing really dumb things with my body, you know, by
mm,
doing overly forceful things with my body. But I've also come to learn how to heal my body and feel better through physical practice as well.
mm, mm,
My whole angle that I've had as a teacher for many years is gentle is the new advanced, because I
mm,
found that gentler and slower practices were much more
mm,
conducive to people finding this subtler experience of themselves than when they're
mm,
like moving really fast and sweating. So I've
mm,
definitely moved in a very slow, simple practice. It's rooted in the idea of personal practice that one might do by themselves at home, which is what I
mm,
learned, but I'm bringing it into like a group yoga class context.
mm, mm, mm. So, if we look into the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and other Yoga Sutras, uh, there is a point we get to Samadhi. So, in the Samadhi point, there is no mind. Uh, because I'm just wondering because whether these experiences can be possible to a western person, because why I'm questioning in this particular way is I'm really curious about that. Why? Because the body of Indians are extremely different from the bodies of the people who are from the west, right? Like if I see the people here in India, they use a lot of probiotics when they are in India, or they use antibiotics, probiotics, and different kind of food thing, which can actually which can actually go well with the Indian conditions, where their body can be taken. Whereas the Indian eats very different kind of food, and so all these thing. How do you see how the have you ever get into a state of samadhi, or at least the glimpse of that? Is that possible with the help of yoga?
I I would say that the state of samadhi is universal to human beings and
Yeah,
isn't
exactly.
specific to
Yeah, that's
cultures.
yeah.
You know, because
That
even
is.
even here in the West,
Mhm.
you know, one can maintain a sattvic diet and not have all those antibiotics and all those things. One can eat rice and dal
Mhm.
regular here too. I do. I eat very much that way. You know,
Mhm.
I've adopted many of what they would call lifestyle choices that you make for what you're
Mhm.
saying, because I think you're right. I think that there are lifestyle choices, the foods that you eat, even like
Mhm.
what you watch on the screens, and all these things can really affect your state and make you more or less conducive to experiencing something like samadhi. So I think that
mm,
you're right. I think that there's a difference, but I don't think it's specific to the East or the West. I imagine there's people in India who eat lots of bad foods and are very far away
mm,
from a state of samadhi as well. I
mm-hmm.
do think
Yeah,
that you're
yeah.
right that the Indian culture, because yoga comes from that culture and it's so
Mm-hmm.
deeply rooted in its history. I've
Mm-hmm.
spoken about this on my show many times. Like it's much more embedded and ingrained than it is for Westerners. I think you really have to kind of
Mm-hmm.
deeply break from Western traditions to get to what is very considered normal or natural in India. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you make a good point of that. In terms of samadhi as a state, I do think that I've heard it talked about in some ways as kind of like this very grand accomplishment that one arrives at through years and years and years of deep meditation, and very few
Mm-hmm.
will ever experience it. But then I've also heard people talk about it in a much more integrated ways, that actually it's a very natural thing that people kind of experience in lots of different ways in their lives, like maybe when they're sitting and watching a sunset or something, and they're whatever, the observer and the observed merge, and there's that
Mm-hmm.
spreading wide open of no mind and no time. Like, I think people have little glimmering moments where your mind might be experiencing something like that. I do think
Mm-hmm.
there's maybe levels or layers of that. And when it becomes
Mm-hmm.
intentional and you understand about states of samadhi and you practice specifically for that purpose and you work with that, then maybe there are kind of like deeper levels of experience or being submerged into samadhi. But
Mm-hmm.
for myself, I find that I spent a lot of time at one point doing deep meditation to try to see if I could reach deeper states of samadhi. I do feel
Mm-hmm.
like I had some times where I experienced something of what I think it might be, but I also
Mm-hmm.
found that at that time it was really removing me from my life. Like it wasn't bringing me into my life. It was a kind of an escape from my life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think sometimes there's like renunciate traditions where you're going to go live in ashram and take
Mm-hmm.
vows and focus on that. And that's like a life path or a journey for yoga. But then I think
Mm-hmm.
for myself, being a Westerner, that didn't really make sense for me. That wasn't going to be the
Mm-hmm.
right choice. So finding a more
Mm-hmm.
integrated path where samadhi is maybe something that I'm not trying to make happen, but maybe happens every once in a while as a kind of gift, as like a city, that happens, like a gift that gets bestowed rather
Mm-hmm.
than like something that you're making a goal of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, when we are speaking about the samadhi and things like that, you are teaching a lot of people. Do you feel like is the yoga practices are helping them also?
I mean, I would hope so. I think so.
Like the thing is like you told you came to India and the first thing you did is like unconditioning yourself. Okay, let it go. So
Mhm.
this is something which people I mean, I feel, I mean, to get into a spiritual experiences, we definitely have to uncondition ourselves. So
Mm.
what you how does it happens, how did you observe and what is actually going on there in that direction?
Well, I have been teaching yoga for almost 30 years now, and in that
Mm-hmm.
time, I've observed so many times somebody who shows up to yoga class and they're in a
Mm-hmm.
certain kind of way. And even within one class, you can see a difference
Mm-hmm.
in that person's state from the time when they walked in the door and the time when they're walking out of the door. But then
Mm-hmm.
I've also had people who have practiced with me for 15, 20 years or something like that, who I've watched and known about who they are and in their lives, and seen how doing regular breathing and moving practice was a sort of touchstone for them, and watched
Mm-hmm.
how that led to them making choices and going in different directions in their lives. So the
Mm-hmm.
transformative power of yoga practice, of having a space where people come together in a spirit of friendship to do
Mm-hmm.
breathing and moving and even chant together, to see
Mm-hmm.
if we can settle ourselves and feel in a way that would allow us to be in life in a more harmonious way. Like, I've come to see that as an incredibly powerful, almost radical thing, especially as everything has gone so digital and people's attentions are being kind of grabbed and hijacked for so
Mm-hmm.
long that for people to put down their phone and go to a yoga practice
Mm-hmm.
uh, is a very significant thing, even in ways that it wasn't in years past.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to kind of keep people with the analog reality of their own selves, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've just seen it. I've seen people heal injuries. I've seen people like turn their lives around and go from being really in deep suffering to really experiencing
Mm-hmm.
joy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's proven over the years to be the most reliable vehicle for people to inquire into themselves and life. And it has all kinds of openness for spiritual practice. I do think it is fundamentally a mystical spiritual tradition. And
Mm-hmm.
within that, though, as we've already discussed some today, one
Mm-hmm.
does have lots of options. There's like atheistic
Mm-hmm.
yogis and theistic yogis. Like you can be a yogi and still hold like a lot of different kind of views. And I think because of that, because it
Mm-hmm.
has that ability to have such a wide spectrum of viewpoint, it allows for people in the West who have maybe let go of like, you know, my parents were Jewish and I kind of rejected that religious faith. So
Mm-hmm.
Westerners like myself who've rejected like religions of their parents because we don't doesn't resonate as true for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga is an arena where we've been able to find our spiritual paths in ways that we weren't before. So I,
Mm-hmm.
at this point, I've always said like if God tells me I should do something else, I will do something else. But as of
Mm-hmm.
right now, it feels like the most important thing that I could be doing is trying
Mm-hmm.
to encourage people to explore themselves, and yoga practice and yoga study is the way that I know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. So in these years, mostly there might be something you could have found. This particular practice of yoga is bit crazy. For example, the hot yoga of Bikram, which has been mostly selling in US, and there is Sadhguru, there is also there is Ravi Shankar, which is from Art of Living, and there are also numerous kind of yoga teachers here and there. uh, can you identify, I mean, did you have you ever felt anything on that thing is actually crazy and this is not going to work out for a Western body or something that sort of like?
Absolutely. I went through a number of different styles, as I said,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen a lot of things, and I taught things as a yoga teacher that I don't teach anymore because I think that they're
Mm-hmm.
potentially injurious. And that's
Mm-hmm.
true not just from like crazy things like goat yoga or some of the wilder things that have come about, but like
Mm-hmm.
even certain traditions aren't right for everybody. You know, somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's
Mm-hmm.
60 something and has like injuries physically trying to do the same practice as like what a 14-year-old would do. It's probably not a
Mm-hmm.
good idea. And yet you
Mm-hmm.
see that a lot because I
Mm-hmm.
think that in the West, yoga has really become closely associated with physical fitness. And that
Mm-hmm.
happened in India too, like with Ghosh
Mm-hmm.
yoga. There was like
Mm-hmm.
some crossover there, but it's different in the West where it's very much about, you know, skinny bodies and a certain way of like working with your
Mm-hmm.
body.
Yeah,
Uh,
the yoga, yeah, definitely it will bring out that particular thing. Yeah, yeah, it's a good thing also because from that they will come to the spirituality actually.
Hopefully, but not always.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You see, sometimes if there's no hint, if the teacher isn't rooted, if the teacher's never
Mhm,
studied yoga in the way that we're trying to talk about it today, where it comes from like a deeper place that's rooted in the tradition and the
mhm,
texts, but they learned it at like some 200-hour training at a gym and they're teaching it as
mhm,
like a fitness thing, then I don't
mhm,
know. Maybe somebody has a good experience and decides to look into it more. But a lot of
mhm,
times people just, it just stays as a workout. It doesn't become
mhm,
more, you know? So I think
mhm,
that a lot of years people have been making this case that, oh, it's good to bring people in because they'll tell them it's stretching, tell them it's strength and flexibility and get them in the door, and then they'll become
mhm,
interested in the deeper aspects.
mhm,
Sometimes this is true and sometimes this isn't. But if the only thing that will sell, like a lot of times it's harder to get people to
mhm,
come to yoga classes that aren't about that.
mhm,
So, it's easier to get someone to come to a handstand workshop than it is to
mhm,
come to a workshop about like the subtle questions of meaning in life.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
much
mhm,
harder to sell that to people.
mhm,
So I think there's room for both. I think it's true. I think in the past I was much more critical of like some of these things that were happening in yoga because I think that they're really not about yoga. They're about selling things to people.
mhm,
But at the
mhm,
same time, as I've gotten older, I feel much more open about these things. Like, who am I to judge who your
mhm,
yoga is going to be? And I'm much
mhm,
more willing to trust that there's divine forces that are at work that are going to guide
mhm,
people in their lives. It's not for me to judge so much
mhm,
anymore. I think the main point that I do think is there's some distinction where sometimes yoga is being used in a way that's just about trying to make money. And then
mhm,
sometimes yoga is really rooted in someone's authentic experience where they really are trying to share in yoga. And I think
mhm,
you can market that too and make money off of that. But there's a
mhm, mhm,
difference. There's a difference, a subtle difference that I think most people can recognize when
mhm,
something's coming from a more authentic, real place and when something's feeling like a cheap gimmick.
mhm, mhm, mhm. So, like, even if they're making money, what I believe is that selling something better is better than selling cocaine, right? Like, I mean,
I agree. I've often said, like, I've had a lot of friends who got very kind of what I would call almost addicted to Kundalini yoga because Kundalini yoga, in the way that Yogi Bhajan taught it, is very
mhm,
much Bhastrika breathing, and it would get everybody into these kind of trance states. And so people I knew who used to be heroin addicts got really
mhm,
into Kundalini yoga, and I used to say the same thing. Hey, it's better to be addicted to Kundalini yoga than heroin,
mhm.
definitely.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but I don't. Maybe it'd be good if we weren't addicted to stuff.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
maybe
mhm,
there's ways of practicing that would help us with that. And I don't always know that some of those practices, like even some of those ones that you pointed to, or what's that guy's name, Guru Dev, where like everybody's doing Kapalabhati breathing for 30 minutes every day or whatever to cure
mhm,
you of whatever it is. Like, I don't know that that's a good idea. I don't know if that's a smart way to disseminate yoga. So
mhm,
a
mhm,
lot of discernment is required these days because I don't know, there's a lot of stuff out there and it's not always
mhm,
easy to find your way to a good teacher.
mhm. So, some of the things, can you point out these things? These things which you found maybe a little bit crazy, that may not be good for the people, or something like, can you point out something? Is
Sure. I
there,
mean,
if there is something?
I would say that years ago, I wrote a blog post back before we had social media, and it was
Mm-hmm.
entitled Notes from a Concerned Practitioner Teacher, because I
Mm-hmm.
had been teaching for a while and I had learned some classical systems of practice. And there was all these things that we were teaching about alignment and about the
Mm-hmm.
body that really didn't hold up. Like, I had injuries and I just didn't see people questioning them.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like we might want to consider that some of the things that we were doing in yoga classes weren't helping people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about your question about, well, what are the crazy things that people have been doing? Well, I think the
Mm-hmm.
crazy things that people have been doing is trying to put their body into extreme shapes with the
Mm-hmm.
idea that that's going to help them become more enlightened or even more physically capable, because I learned that you can make yourself really strong and flexible. You can be able
Mm-hmm.
to put your feet on your head and do incredible feats of asana practice and still have
Mm-hmm.
lots of pain and be totally miserable in your life. So when
Mm-hmm.
you go on Instagram right now, and for a
Mm-hmm.
while people stopped doing this, it was sort of frowned upon to like use your own physical practice to get people to come to class. Like, a lot of teachers stopped doing that. But
Mm-hmm.
nowadays things have gotten hard. And so people are kind of going back to that, where you see a
Mm-hmm.
teacher on Instagram showing off how amazing they can do their crow pulls or whatever. And
Mhm.
people look at that and they go, oh my God, look at how incredible that is. I want to be able to do that. And
Mhm.
so to me, that's the crazy thing. The crazy thing is that we're using asana as like
Mhm.
this idea that if you accomplish asana, it's going to equal X, Y, and Z. And I haven't found that to be true. So people just doing extreme things with their bodies,
Mhm.
in my view, is actually kind of destabilizing the system more than stabilizing the system.
Mhm.
So, I think that's the craziest thing I see is just people overemphasizing the physicalities of practice.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that gives people a wrong impression about what yoga is. We started this conversation with you asking me like what
Mhm.
yoga means to me and these bigger questions. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes the way that yoga is presented, it's harder for people to find their way to that, which I think is the most important part.
What is that? Can you elaborate a bit more?
Well, I think that sometimes people it's a challenge for people to just
Mhm.
slow down and be with themselves in a kind of
Mhm.
intimate way. They want
Mhm.
something intense to
Mhm.
distract their system, to get out of their heads, as they say.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
to not do that, to not bombard people with loud music and fast sequences,
Mhm.
but to have slow, simple practice where people have more space to reflect is challenging
Mhm.
in a different way.
Mhm.
To me, it's crazy the way that people force their bodies into things with
Mhm.
some idea that it's going to lead to some magical place as
Mhm.
though they're not
Mhm.
already there,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
kind of creating this relationship to their body where it's like adversarial. You're trying to like fix your body or force your body.
Mhm.
And I think for me, that's crazy. That's the crazy thing because it,
Mhm.
it starts from a place of lacking. It says that you're
Mhm.
not like a whole being and you've got to do something to make yourself whole. And I do
Mhm.
believe that we are already whole beings.
Mhm. The idea, like, for example, some kind of extreme practices which is somebody is doing, and he is really not needed that particular practice basically. So but this level of understanding comes from basically the self awareness, like, I am this, I can do this much, or I am capable to do that much, and this is what my body is really needed. So how do you crack this particular problem? Because this is a particular problem, right? Like, we our senses are always dragged into different things which is around us, like, there is social media, there is a binary world altogether, and things like that, and there is a particular world, there is people are trying to sell stuffs to us. So in this particular kind of world, comes into a state of self awareness and identify the right practices which is suitable for this particular person. Whereas there are a lot of practices are actually available in the name of yoga basically. The sun salute, and sun salute is basically, it has been practiced from long back from India, and there are different kind of pranayams and stuffs like that, and many people comes into this particular thing and they created their own yoga. For example, I'm trying to say the Vikram, he created hot yoga, is his own trademark yoga basically. That So there is a lot of fuss actually is been got created around this particular set of practices. So how do somebody can crack into this particular problem? How do somebody can actually go through this particular ocean?
It's a very good question. I would say that, the Desikachar tradition was usually taught one to one. You had a relationship to
Mhm.
your teacher, and that teacher would help design personal practices for you that would change
Mhm.
over time so that it would meet your needs as you grew and evolved.
Mhm.
However, we have this modern group yoga class context where that's not always possible. You don't have the same setup. You don't have someone coming to look for a teacher
Mhm.
and asking, will you teach me yoga? You have people
Mhm.
paying for their drop-in yoga class and saying, okay, give it to
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
so what I took to doing was I came up with a very simple program of asana pranayama that I teach again and again and again. Very simple: inhale,
Mhm.
arms up, exhale, arms down. And the
Mhm.
idea is to use this simple program to teach primary principles: breath
Mhm.
and bandha, stira and sukha, just
Mhm.
primary principles of practice that one could learn in
Mhm.
a group setting so that if they
Mhm.
wanted to practice by themselves at home, they could. So it's a
Mhm.
way, like I
Mhm.
said, of trying to have the group class be a place where someone
Mhm.
can actually learn basic principles of practice. Now, those
Mhm.
being applied to them on an individual level is another thing. It depends on
Mhm.
how big the classes are. Right now, I'm
Mhm.
teaching very small classes, maybe 4 or 5 people. People are coming back
Mhm.
again and again, and I'm getting to know them. So
Mhm.
we have some relationship. So even in a class of 4 or 5 people, it's very easy
Mhm.
for me to go over to that person and offer suggestions that are more appropriate for that person. My class
Mhm.
is designed that way so that I can do that. So there's kind of a thing that we're all doing together, but
Mhm.
we can also be doing our own thing at the same time, and we can
Mhm.
change it
Mhm.
in any way that we need to,
Mhm.
depending. So it's a way of trying to have practice be more individualized, even when we're doing
Mhm.
it together. It's a little bit like some other traditions, like the Ashtanga tradition, Ashtanga Vinyasa, where there is a
Mhm.
set practice and it's done in Mysore style, where everybody's coming and doing it on their own, even though they're doing
Mhm.
it together in the same room. And then the teacher's
Mhm.
walking around and giving individualized instruction. I'm doing
Mhm.
something more similar to that. Um, but in terms of using appropriate practices, what I've taken to doing is using the simplest of practices that can
Mhm.
easily be adapted rather than
Mhm.
like choosing more intricate poses and then trying to come up with steps or lots of
Mhm.
options for people. I'm just
Mhm.
doing the simplest step one for everybody. And then
Mhm.
maybe
Mhm.
I'm going over to someone individually and giving them
Mhm.
some other steps if it's appropriate. But for the
Mhm.
group class, for everybody, we just do step
Mhm.
one. And honestly, for most people, step one is more than enough.
Mhm. 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 Did you saw any transformation on the people? For example, we have spoken about the guy who is addicted to drug and narcotics. Basically, he started using the Kundalini yoga, and he got addicted to the better things than that of the wrong things. So something like that. Have you saw any kind of transformation in your classes?
I have. I mean, I would say that the first transformation I observed was my own, that
Mm-hmm.
it changed me in very deep ways, in such ways that people who were in my life and watched it happen all observed that there were big changes in me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, I've been teaching yoga for many years and I've seen countless examples, and even people, sending me an email to tell me that, the thing that I taught them in tree pose helped them through their
Mhm,
cancer treatments. So,
mhm, mhm,
those
mhm,
moments where you feel like deep human connection and you feel like you're there together as friends getting through
mhm,
things, and
mhm,
that you've been helpful in some way, that someone coming to your class or something that you said to them was really helpful to them in a deep way and they shared that with you. That's
mhm,
what makes it worth it. You don't make a lot of money as a yoga teacher like me, because I don't do a lot of
mhm,
the things that you need to do to make a lot of money, and I've never wanted to make a lot of money. But
mhm, mhm,
what makes it worth it is those
mhm,
moments where you hear from someone or you witness somebody go through a transformative experience and you feel that you've
mhm,
played some role in that. That's
mhm,
very worthwhile and meaningful, and why I've been at it for as long as I have.
mhm. So there is best things has happened. Also, there might be worst case scenarios as well. Have you gone through any of that stuff? Because somebody has turned into yoga and his life has gone.
Hmm. I mean, I would say that in my early years of teaching, I felt like I was more reckless, like I just was immature. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that I might have said things or taught things that might not have been very helpful, might have been like counterproductive. And like you say, if somebody was in like a not great place, it,
Mm-hmm.
it might not have been a good thing for me to say or do with them. But as I've gotten older, I've certainly become more sensitive. At certain point in time, I
Mm-hmm.
made a very clear determination. I said to myself that I wanted to teach a kind of yoga class that my mom could come to if she were still alive. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that has changed my choices as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, a lot of the people I opened a yoga center in my neighborhood about 7 months ago, which is something I said I would never do again. It was a very
Mm-hmm.
small place, and almost like 60% of them are all women in their 70s and 80s. They're basically like women who would be the same age as my mom. So most of the
Mm-hmm.
people I teach are like my mom these days. So I
Mm-hmm.
say that um, because of that, I think my class takes a lot of things off the table that would potentially cause problems for people. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they have this expression accessible yoga, which is sort of silly because I think yoga is always intended to be accessible, like you make it right for the person, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes yoga is presented in a way where it's not right for certain people and it's not accessible to them.
Mm-hmm.
But my class, I think nowadays it's really inviting only a certain kind of person. Like some people who are looking for that other thing, they're not going to like my class. They're not going to come back. So, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. So, for
Mm-hmm.
me, only a certain sort of person is coming to my class and, resonating with the kind of intention that I'm holding.
Mm-hmm. 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 So, when we are speaking about the bodies of Indians and Westerners, did you saw any differences there? Because multiple people has multiple bodies.
I
You
mean,
under
the one thing I would say about that, I actually remember something very specific, which was
Mm-hmm.
when I was in India, you often were not sitting in chairs, but you were sitting in a squat position.
Mm-hmm.
And while you were eating or going to the bathroom, whatever it was, you were in a
Mm-hmm.
squat way more than my whole
Mm-hmm.
life growing up as a Westerner because we were always sitting in chairs. And
Mm-hmm.
I had been practicing yoga for a very long time. So I was pretty flexible and I can sit in a squat, maybe better than a lot of other Westerners could. But I remember
Mm-hmm.
sitting around while we were eating and looking around and we were in a squat and
Mm-hmm.
like everybody else's knees were like way
Mm-hmm.
up here, like next to the top of their head. But my
Mm-hmm.
knees were down lower here, like toward the bottom of my head. And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, like if you spend your whole life in a squat position, not sitting in a chair, your body
Mm-hmm.
actually is shaped differently. Like your bones end up shaped differently. And there's actually
Mm-hmm.
certain poses, leg behind the head poses, and a number of things that are in the pantheon of yoga that I think are like more natural and easy for Indian bodies that are
Mm-hmm.
not so natural or good for Westerner bodies, depending. So I did notice that there was some differences. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably exceptions. I know plenty of Westerners who can put their leg behind their head. I was able to do it at some point, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a thing just in terms of the way that people move through their lives. Like if you don't have chairs that you sit in all the time, your body's
Mm-hmm.
gonna have different mobility and a different shape than if you do have chairs. So
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely some differences for sure.
Mm-hmm. Have you come across anything like that, like in your classes per se, like?
Well, I don't know. In my classes, I think that people are just coming in with so many different situations, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times they don't always have that much awareness. I mean, I can give you an example where I had someone come in the other day. She was a new student, and I asked
Mm-hmm.
her about if she had anything going on. She mentioned to me that she had like a shoulder reconstruction. And,
Mm-hmm.
so there's only a little bit of section in my class where we do weight bearing, like a little bit of down dog and sun salutations, maybe 5 minutes, very simple
Mm-hmm.
version. But I
Mm-hmm.
said to her, I don't know if maybe we want to do a different version because we can use a chair or we can use a wall. There's like ways to do it that are maybe better if you've got a
Mm-hmm.
shoulder that's had surgery. And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, no, 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 it's fine. It's fine. I can do it. Like she really, but then when I watched her, is
Mm-hmm.
clearly too much. But she
Mm-hmm.
was going to suffer through. And, she was her first time in my class. So I was a little bit, sometimes I like to leave someone alone a little bit. I don't want to like be in their face too much the first time they come. But I actually did stop her and invite her to do the chair version, which another person was also doing. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to say that she did take me up on it. And I think it was much better for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I do think that she came back again today and we did it with the
Mhm.
chair, and I think it's better. So I'm not sure if I
Mhm.
answered your question, but I think in terms of people coming into my class and finding ways to adapt the practice to them that makes sense, or even people
Mhm.
coming in a way where sometimes they're just not really able, they're not even in their bodies, their minds are kind of all over in lots of places. So
Mhm.
I'll give them an instruction and like be doing it right in front of them, and they're still not doing it because they're just, their minds are all over the place. So I
Mhm.
think there's a process of first someone just like getting here and being present and the prana being in their body. And then
Mhm.
I can kind of see the people who've been coming now for maybe 5, 6 months. They're
Mhm.
like, they're with their breath more. You know, you can really tell when somebody's like really with what they're doing and they're not thinking about a lot of other things. So
Mhm.
you can observe it. You can see if someone comes consistently and they practice again and again, you can start to see the way things become integrated and they're really with their breath more, and then their body is being
Mhm.
inhabited in a more full way. You can kind of notice. And then
Mhm.
often when you notice that physically, they'll then
Mhm.
after class be sitting here and they'll tell you about this big change that happened in their life or whatever. Like there's
Mhm.
often like some life thing that associates when you see it happen in their bodies. And I think that's really cool thing about yoga. I
Mhm.
don't always know what's going on with people or what's going on. Like everybody's got their own dharmas and karmas, but you
Mhm.
can kind of
Mhm.
observe as like a friend the way it happens and the way things unfold for people in their lives, and the way that
Mhm.
yoga can be a place for people to have awareness about that.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's pretty
So
cool.
there is also, when we talk about yoga in whole sense, there is also mantras are being used. Also, there is symbolisms has been used, especially in India. When we look into Ardhanarishwara, from an Indian mind, it is a god, but from a critical mind, it is a half women and a half. Um, I mean, half Shakti and Shiva, so it's a completion of the self, and it's a kind of symbolism when we take into the path of yoga. And there are mantras is been used, especially for the sun salute is the simplest way of doing the yoga. And so when we talk about the mantras, the pronunciation of the mantras differ from Indian to Western. For
Mm.
example, I like to I like to hear some songs which is composed by the from the West, because the pronunciation or the way they chant the mantra looks really I mean, it's quite entertaining as well. So I mean, I'm not trying to critic, I'm trying to understand, because truth cannot be two, like, truth can be only one. If it is two, then it is not truth, because there truth cannot be two, right? And so when we look into that thing, have you ever tried to integrate the mantras into your practices, and show some sort of effects in their practices, or try to integrate some sort of symbolism in the yoga studio or the practices which you do? Have you observed something like that?
I have had a practice of chanting for many years. There's a few mantras, that Gayatri mantra and others that have been part of my practice. I
Mm-hmm.
have done a little bit of study in Vedic chanting. I know a little bit, but I have not been trained in a very traditional way. And I have
Mm-hmm.
grappled with this. At some point, I did sort of stop doing the chanting because I came concerned that maybe I was appropriating in a certain way and that I hadn't been formally trained. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I think that there are certain types of chanting that have been held through history because they're taught in a certain way and there's a certain pronunciation to it and it wants to be
Mm-hmm.
learned appropriately. So I hear the criticism that you're making and I think it's warranted. I will
Mm-hmm.
say though that I did have teachers who studied with Desikachar, and Desikachar was pretty clear that there were some kinds of chanting that really did need to be held in a strict way. Certain Vedic
Mm-hmm.
chanting has certain significances to religious rites and cultural rites that wants to
Mm-hmm.
be held in a kind of strict and respectful way. And
Mhm.
there were also other types of chanting that had more room to them, that were allowed
Mhm.
to be more about personal expression, and that there were
Mhm.
occasions when it was okay for someone to explore the chanting in other ways, not so following all of the Vedic chanting rules. Um,
Mhm.
so, I've gone back and forth with it. Uh,
Mhm.
I've had experiences where people have come to my class, like Westerners who were
Mhm.
offended by me doing the chanting, but then I've had people from India come up to me crying afterwards and giving me hugs, thanking me for doing the
Mhm.
chanting.
Mhm.
What I would
Mhm.
say is, for me personally, I've had you talk about transformative experiences through practice. I'd say some of my most transformative experiences have been through
Mhm.
mantra and chanting, because
Mhm.
the making of sound in combination with the breath that's required for it,
Mhm.
it does something. It makes my mind go to a certain place, like we talked about earlier, where you
Mhm.
go to certain states,
Yeah, the yeah
more
observer
so than
and
like
observed
just
become the
doing
same.
breathing and
Yeah.
moving exercises or reading sutras, like chanting and
Mhm.
kind of just being in the bhav of that has very transformative, and that's why I've kept doing it. There's a
Mhm.
reason why it's listed in the text, asana pranayama mantra. It's right there,
Mhm. Mhm.
so I think there's something very powerful about Sanskrit mantras. So I have
Mhm.
tried to learn them in a way that was respectful, and in a
Mhm.
way that honors the traditions that they come from. I don't really
Mhm.
fancy myself a chanting teacher. I don't like
Mhm.
teach people the chants because I don't feel that I'm qualified to do that. I do
Mhm.
chant in my class, and I do invite people, if they want to chant along with me, they
Mhm.
can. But I don't
Mhm.
really think of myself as a chanting teacher. I do
Mhm.
put it in my classes though, because I feel like, especially nowadays, I want
Mhm.
there to be that. I feel like it's like a signpost that says, this comes
Mhm.
from ancient wisdom cultures from India. Like I want it, I want people to know where this comes from. And I consider it a way for me to kind of show reverence and honor to those traditions in doing the chanting.
Mhm. Mhm. Did you try to teach the chanting to the people, and did you observe, or you have you ever got a data that supports the um, chanting can make an effect?
I mean, I do think that there's plenty of like studies that are being done about the effects
No,
of
I mean
chanting.
that is there out there, but I'm talking about you.
Yeah, no,
I
for
mean,
me, I hear you. I think it's very personal. Like, I've been very
mhm,
careful about it because, people have different religious views that they're coming with and whatnot. And
mhm,
again, I think there's different types of chanting too. There's chanting to
mhm,
certain deities, and then there's Vedic mantras, and there's call and response, like kirtan chanting is sort of a lot of ways that one might engage with mantras. There's like someone learning a personal mantra that they're just saying internally while they're sitting. There's different
mhm,
ways that one might engage with mantras in the way that they're given or shared. For
mhm,
me, as I said earlier, my class has often been about kind of teaching in principles, general principles to group classes. And I think
mhm,
chanting has been presented in a similar way. I do
mhm,
also train and mentor teachers over the years, and I
mhm,
have, shared with people the chants that I do and have done them with them and have watched
mhm,
people benefit from that. Normally, like in the
mhm,
West, we don't have like a lot of occasions where we do singing. Like, everybody thinks they're a bad singer. And like,
mhm,
if you were like in your room by yourself and you were like trying to sing a song on the radio and you didn't know the words, and then someone
mhm,
came in and saw you, would be very embarrassing. So like,
mhm,
everybody has all this baggage around singing. So in a way, letting yourself chant even just ohms, just like opening your mouth and letting a breath come out and making the sound of om, and that coming together with other people making om, and that creating a resonant vibration in the room, is
mhm,
very, I think, powerful, even for people who don't, even just people listening to it in the room while it's happening. It feels
mhm,
very powerful. So I wouldn't have kept doing it all these years if I didn't see it continually having a really positive effect on the people who are practicing with me.
mhm, mhm, mhm. And have you tried to integrate any sort of symbolism in yoga? For example, yin and yang, or Ardhanarishara, or yantras, the spots of yantras, like for example, there is yantras also there. Sri yantra is most famous yantras, which many people has been using, and there is Mahavidya yantras, Kali, Tara, Shodasi. All these goddesses has a particular yantras. Have you ever tried to integrate the symbolism, the ancient symbolism, or the ancient diagrams, or the divine diagrams into the practices which you do, and have you observed something out of that?
I mean, I would say yes. I've certainly
Mm-hmm.
explored being devoted to different deities at different times. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you're using the video from this, but I'll go ahead and show you. I happen to have the Sri Yantra tattooed on my shoulder, which I know for some
Mm-hmm.
people might be considered a very sacrilegious thing to do. But for me,
Mm-hmm.
it was very significant as a symbol because not only did I sort of associate it with the same thing I associate the sound of Om with, but it's also very
Mm-hmm.
specific to the practice that I learned. Like in Desikachar teachings, they have very specific ideas about breath, like inhale from above and exhale from below. And Sri Yantra
Mm-hmm.
is actually considered a diagram of that, of inhale and exhale. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
meditating on Sri Yantra and the triangles of Sri Yantra and my breath, those things have gone
Mm-hmm.
very hand in hand. So I think
Mm-hmm.
the symbols have been a powerful tool, powerful meditative tool for me over the years.
Mm-hmm. And have you saw any observation, like it's again, you don't say there is studies are out there, no, I just want to know from your own experiences, like what was happened, is there anything which you came across or something?
In terms of symbols,
Mm-hmm. Like integrated, I mean, let's say there is a yoga practices which can be done without the symbolism, and you try to integrate the symbolism in that particular set of practices, and so some sort of effect from that.
I mean, I think that the use of like ideas or symbols have often been an important way to uh, show that physical practice encompasses more. You know, an
Mm-hmm.
example for me would even be like a warrior two body position. You can have warrior two be like this big physical challenge, or you can
Mm-hmm.
have it be more about like a practice of mental attitude where you have
Mm-hmm.
resilience and determination, and you can use metaphor and symbolism. I haven't done a lot of that. I don't always teach from like sutras in my class. I would do that more in like a teacher training context. But I
Mm-hmm.
certainly think that you can bring in the symbols of yoga and the
Mm-hmm.
principles, as I was saying earlier. And when people hold those ideas while they're doing physical practice, I think sometimes connections get made where you can see how the physical practice becomes a precedence for these
Mm-hmm.
more important aspects, you know?
Mm-hmm. 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 But the thing is, like, have you ever observed any effect in your classes, or did you try to do this?
I mean, I have certainly taught or mentioned about Sri Yantra when I'm teaching specific
Mm-hmm.
things about breath patterns and bandha as it's taught in the Desikachar tradition. So,
And what the here I think I didn't explain it correctly. For example, like there is a set of tantric practices where you sit in the middle of a particular yantra and focus on some different parts of your body, and
mm,
along with the mudra and certain body posture, and that can bring a kind of, I mean, uh, in modern times we could actually say it can open up multiple different types of dimensions for this particular practitioner, or the sadhaka, or the sadhaka, but sometime people can think the hallucinations can come into their mind, and they go wrong about the practices and stuffs like that. So I'm just curious, like, have you ever tried to integrate these sort of steps into the practices, and have you ever observed anything like that?
yeah, I mentioned earlier, I did at some point engage in those sorts of practices and had some experiences, even like seeing different things, colors and different visions and whatnot. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at some point, like I said, I felt that it was It was not a smart, it was, I didn't know what I was doing. And I feel like in a way, sometimes people are engaging in those practices without good
Mm-hmm.
guidance. You're kind of opening yourself up to the mystical unknown. But what I learned is that actually there's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
demonic evil things. I've come to believe that there is good and evil, and that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That I.
just tapping into the mystical unknown doesn't mean you're going to get bliss or enlightenment. That there's actually a lot of things that are not, you don't want to be getting in touch with. You know, you could be
Mhm, mhm.
inviting in all kinds of spirits into yourself.
Yeah,
And
that's what I have spoken about the Aleister Crowley. You remember, like
yeah,
the thing is
exactly.
like
I think
he speak a lot about
I know,
yogam, and
but I
yeah,
think
he
that
got
that
united with
actually,
some energy. What we
but see,
really
I think
don't know
people
what
have
sort of
used
meant.
yogic practices for
Mm-hmm.
essentially Luciferian purposes. I know, I mean, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
like Aleister Crowley's coming from a Christian viewpoint in some ways. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's using these practices as a way to essentially deny God. You know, I mean, like so much
Mm-hmm.
the whole other podcast that I have to talk
Mm-hmm.
about this, but like I think that you can utilize yoga practices in a way that are not very healthy, and sometimes, especially for Westerners, to try to be doing some of the things that you're talking about. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
know that there's a good purpose for that, and I think, like you say, it can actually be incredibly destabilizing in a way that's
Mm-hmm.
not healthy or good. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you ever, anybody has ever shared any stories like that to you? Like they have integrated any sort of yantras and along with the mantras in the practices, and they have seen something which is really weird. For example, like I'm not so sure. Many people are known about something called the Detura. This is a kind of herb which I have tried in my own self, like so what I felt is like I was dying for 2 to 3 days. I really got opened into really really intense colors and
Mhm.
intense feelings and stuffs like that. Did anybody, I mean, no, we are not talking about the herbs over here, but did anybody has ever shared these sort of stories when they are trying to do the practice along with the yantras and mantras and
Sure.
something?
I mean, I've had a lot of people on my show and talked about a lot
Mm-hmm.
of different areas. You know, plant medicines is a big thing, people using different plants and substances to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish different states of mind. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of this is for ways that people are finding to experience the spiritual
Mm-hmm.
realm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that, again, sometimes I don't always know if it's very healthy or smart or important for people to be doing it.
Mhm.
Everybody
No,
has their own.
no, I mean, we are not talking about the plant medicines here. Like
Yeah.
there is a book, there is a Veda, Atharva Veda, which talks about how to use the plant medicines in some certain way. Generally, it will take 41 days. It has to put in milk and things like that.
Mhm.
It is a very big book, actually. Like I think I have a
Yeah.
copy of that. It's something like this.
Mhm.
So this book is really quite big. So the book is basically talks about all those stuff. So I'm just curious, like the peoples who has ever came across these sort of experiences with the yoga practices, mandalas and yantras, and did anybody has shared something, some story similar to that to you, which made sense to you basically?
Well, I mean, again, it depends. It's a little bit of a generational thing. So if I'm talking to
Mm-hmm.
someone who's older and came to yoga in the 60s and 70s, they
Mm-hmm.
often went and had some kind of like deep, crazy experience. I remember I was very inspired at one point by someone named Yuji Krishnamurti. I don't know if you know Yuji. He was a student
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah,
J.
Jittu.
Krishnamurti. I spent a little
Mm-hmm.
time in the room with him, and he would talk about his what he called calamity, where
Mm-hmm.
everything dissolved and fell apart for him, and he was never the same. But
Mm-hmm.
he was also like not necessarily like a healthy example of living a good life, even though he
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
experienced this deep sense of oneness or whatnot, a dissolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I think I've certainly known people over the years who've explored these things and experienced these things. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of truth to the
Mm-hmm.
consciousness-based reality that yoga
Mm-hmm.
points to.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have just sort of personally felt more inspired or more interested in like what brings us, like how are we going to be here in a
Mm-hmm.
good way more than like look at how cool it is to experience what's beyond here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So can you share any of this story? Because why? Because see, when I'm talking about these sort of experiences, most of the people share the things which they felt in the mind. Because I believe in this particular place there is no mind, because mind cannot experience these kind of things, So I mean, have you ever I mean, something which which you feel there is some truth in it, because it's not the experience of the mind, because mind can have illusions, mind will give illusions, so have you ever came across anything like that which you would love to share? Like, I'm just curious, like,
No,
I mean.
I appreciate the question. It's very difficult to find words because we're trying to talk about something that doesn't have words. Like you
Mm-hmm.
say, it's not of the mind. So I don't know. I think I've had this conversation with people when we try to talk about what meditation is, which sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people really separate like yoga and meditation like they're separate. I really
Mm-hmm.
don't. I just see meditation as part and parcel of yoga. And
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of a practice, there's like a thing that you could do that you would call
Mm-hmm.
meditation. But then there's also a state, right? There's an experience that one would have of meditation, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
agreement with you is not a mind. You're not doing anything and it's not
Mm-hmm.
of the mind. It's
Mm-hmm.
the mind spreads out, it's beyond mind. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've maybe had some moments that felt like that. I would
Mm-hmm.
have no idea how to try to explain them or find words for
Mm-hmm.
them for other people. But like I said,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like nowadays I experience that as more of a natural thing that happens in certain moments.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm able to be aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
like to some degree. But again, it's not of your mind. You can't think your way into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate the distinction. It's hard to make it, but it's an
Mm-hmm.
important one because you don't do it and it's not of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think, personal. It's personal for you. It's not something
Mm-hmm.
that you then promote or make money off
Mm-hmm.
of, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we have spoken about the using the yoga practices, is there any stories somebody has spoken to you in any of your episodes which you feel it has some truth in it, like that?
Well, I don't know, just in my own life, I have experienced
Mm-hmm.
a couple of different things. I've experienced what I feel are like entities, like disembodied
Mm-hmm.
entities or forces that
Mm-hmm.
are at work, both like for good and for bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also experienced what I do believe to be like divine intervention, where
Mm-hmm.
you pray and you ask and you say,
Mm-hmm.
"Are you real? If you're real, I need you to show me." And then
Mm-hmm.
something happens that shows you, and you say, "Okay, I think
Yeah,
you're
we
real."
call it as pantheon of deities, right? Like,
Yeah, you
you know.
test it. You say, "If you're real, you have to show me." And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe even again, you don't still don't believe it. But at some point, there's not doubt in you. You're like, okay, I believe this, even if it's crazy, even if the idea that there's God or there's some deity or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that you're praying to that's crazy to some people, but not to me because I've seen it and experienced it as truth. I've had
Mm-hmm.
a prayer answered uh,
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged me. So in terms of stories that people tell on the show, certainly, like I said, there's certain generation of yoga
Mm-hmm.
practitioner. When I ask them, they'll tell me
Mm-hmm.
about their experience of meeting the guru and getting tapped on the forehead and getting shaktipat, and then having like
Mm-hmm.
3 days where, like you, they couldn't even get up or whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
their whole nervous system was rewired after that. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
certain generations of people experienced those kinds of like immediate transformative experiences. I think
Mm-hmm.
nowadays people come to yoga classes and they're more fitness oriented. I think it
Mm-hmm.
takes a little bit more for people to kind of find their way to a teacher and then maybe to some of those experiences, but in 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 a different way than like in the 60s and the 70s, you know.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm. Yeah. So,
Arun,
if
I don't
you,
know. I'm looking at the clock. We need to wrap up pretty soon. I've got
yeah,
another
yeah,
appointment
yeah,
coming
that's
up
what.
just to give you a heads up.
Thank you for giving the time. Like,
Yes.
so do you want to say something? If somebody want to connect with you, where they can connect with you?
It's easy. You would go to jbrownyoga.com. That's letter
Mm-hmm,
J, BROWN yoga.com. And I've got a
mm-hmm,
bunch of stuff there. I've got my podcast, which, like I said, I've been at for 10 years. Really
mm-hmm,
cool archive of people who've been on there, teachers from
mm-hmm,
all over the world. I
mm-hmm,
also have my own stuff on there, like my ongoing, like video
mm-hmm,
stuff that you can do, or ongoing live classes that I have. All of the
mm-hmm,
stuff that I'm doing can be found at jbrownyoga.com.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And anything else you want to say to the people who are listening to this?
No, not really. I appreciate you. I don't know how you found me or what inspired you to reach out, but I had someone on my show recently, a young person who started a podcast like a year and a half ago, and she said,
Mm-hmm,
you know, I was nervous to ask you, and I said, oh gosh, I wish if somebody reaches out to me, if podcasters reach out to me, I know what it is to
mm-hmm,
have a podcast and how hard it is to get guests and to
mm-hmm.
create episodes that people might find interesting. So I'm
Yeah.
always happy to do podcasts and get invited, and I'm just glad that
Yeah,
you reached
the
out.
problem, yeah, I've been inviting people, like, but the problem is with the podcasting is that the many people come here to sell that
Yeah.
thing people really don't want to listen to. What is there, like,
I know, but you
I
know
mean,
the crazy thing about that is the
mm,
way that podcasting works, if they don't do that, if they just come and connect with you and people think that's
mhm.
interesting, they'll want to buy their stuff more than if they come
Yeah,
and try to
exactly.
sell it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, because people can make out, if
Yeah.
somebody is,
I agree. I
yeah,
agree. But
anyway, yeah.
no, I don't have anything special to say to folks. I just hope people are
Mm-hmm,
doing okay. It's really hard out there. We're living in very
mm-hmm,
difficult times, I think, and I'm happy to have an opportunity to speak with you. And if anybody
mm-hmm.
wants to look into any of my stuff, again, they can find me online. I'm around.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. Maybe we can have another show in sometime later.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. You can reach out.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Take care.
Yeah.